Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic. Let's do it. What's the worst injury you've read about that you think you'd be better off dead from? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. A friend of mine was an EMT. They got called to the scene of an attempted suicide. The person put a shotgun below their chin, was looking up, and pulled the trigger, only the shotgun was pointed too far out from under his chin and only succeeded in blowing his jaw off. Tilt your head back and put your finger under your chin. Notice how everything above there is nice to have. It's not going to kill you right away if you blow it off with a shotgun. So they arrived to the scene, and this poor bloody man is attempting to find another shotgun shell and reload with half his face gone. Well, not the worst. It was in the news quite a bit a number of years back. Guy sued San Francisco for like $10 million for being hit in the head by a pine cone from one of their trees. Then, when you read down through the article, and there was a video interview with the guy, missing half his skull and much of his brain, severely impaired but somewhat functioning. It was one of those giant ass pine cones that weigh like 20 pounds. Hasashi, a worker at a nuclear fuel plant who was standing next to a uranium oxide critically incident and received the worst known case of radiation poisoning, worse than folks at Chernobyl. The radiation destroyed his DNA, but it took him 83 days to die. His skin fell off, and all of his organs slowly failed. There is this famous court case or person, Dax Cowart. Him and his dad were checking out a plot of land to buy and were returning to their car. Anyway, somehow, I think through a leak in the underground pipe or something, the air was just full of flammable propane, right? And when they started the car, they set the entire creek bed up in a real-life godforsaken fireball. Cowart's dad died, and Cowart, having had all of his skin and outward organs melted off, wanted to die. The man had no hands left. Lots of grafting and plastic surgeries and amputations over several years, basically keeping him together. By the end, I think he actually looked normalish. Doctors said, nope, can't die. Man became a professor and lawyer and fought for his damn right to die. He has a documentary somewhere, if I recall. And until just recently, I do believe he passed away within the last decade. Man said he knew nothing but pain and was basically kept up and Adam outside his will for a good couple of decades. I work in healthcare, and a poor little 3-year-old child was in the PICU with severe burns on his entire body. I've never ever seen anything so horrific in my life. Nobody deserves this. My heart broke for this child. Every time I'd see him, a little bit more of him was gone. Fingers, then toes, then hands, etc. all had to be amputated. He's still here in the hospital recovering, and he only has upper arms and thighs left. Both of his parents are addicts. I shed a tear just thinking about this poor child. Had a patient who had cardiac arrest, brought back from CPR for a long time. The lack of oxygen to their brain meant they had strokes and brain damage. They ended up blind and paralyzed on both sides of their body. They could talk and hear, but couldn't even feed themselves, push a wheelchair, etc. Locked-in syndrome is pretty effed up. It's basically when you get some sort of brain damage from stroke, poison, or overdose, etc. in the lower parts of the brain and brainstem, causing you to have no cognitive loss, but also no control over your body. Most commonly, the patient can blink and move their eyes, which is the only way they can communicate. I'd probably prefer that. The stroke killed me. That poor bastard that got tortured by the cartel on video, injected with meth to keep him alive and conscious while they peeled off his entire face and chainsawed off his hands. He brought his stumps up to his face and started screaming, and one of the torturers says to the other, "I told you we should have cut off his tongue." Then they cut off his tongue with a box cutter and then decapitate him, I think with the same box cutter, just next level evil. Nothing specific, but I've seen agreement amongst healthcare professionals that individuals who survive extreme burns suffer a lot, and it's agonizing pain because the doctor has to peel away the burnt tissue to expose the good skin and nerves. I sunburn easily, and I hate those. I certainly agree that a burn to that degree would likely have me wishing I was dead. Too many stroke or brain injury sufferers whose families were unwilling to allow their family to pass peacefully, but luckily they survive and are now bedridden, unresponsive, incontinent, and tube-fed, and will end up in a care home until they eventually die of aspiration or UTI sepsis. The guy locally who fell headfirst into a vat of boiling oil at a Sunday fish fry and survived. He somehow kept the majority of his face up and out of the oil, but it got the side of his head, ear, and entire chest and arm and torso. His injuries were extensive enough that he was inpatient for weeks, and then rehab, and then home with 1 metric F-ton of equipment. Death would have been kinder. I read a story about a trucker disconnecting his air brakes and the hose got loose from his grip and lodged inside him. The air pushed through his body, separating his skin from his whole body. David Jordan Robinson. In 1983, his father gave him sleeping pills, covered his in kerosene, and then set him on fire. He was 6 years old at the time, and he ended up having third-degree burns over 90% of his body. His parents were fighting over custody, and his father planned on it being a murder-suicide, but I guess he decided not to kill himself. I know there is a book, and I believed it was made for a TV movie out there about the story. Allison Botha. In 1994, she was abducted at knife point by 2 men outside her home in South Africa. Driven into a nature preserve off the main road, she was AR'd, disemboweled, almost decapitated, and left for dead. Against extraordinary odds, Allison survived this horrific attack. I always felt horrible for a coworker. Wife was pregnant with twins. Girl was born healthy and boy was born with major chest organ outside his body. Daughter came home after a couple of days. Son never left the hospital. He lived for just over a year, and everything they could do to help him, nothing they could do got him well enough to help. The parents looked like they aged a decade in 12 months. I still think about them a lot. I read this article a bit ago about a 9/11 jumper surviving the jump. All her limbs, except for an arm, were amputated, crushed. Her head injuries made her look like a zombie from The Walking Dead, with parts of hair and blood all over. She was screaming in pain. A medical examiner was too shocked and couldn't have the urge to help a human who's in that much horror. The first responder just put a triage tag on her and left her to die. She apparently was in the medical field and knew what it was, so she screamed, "No, I'm not dead, I'm not dead." Just imagining what her body would have looked like when viewing other jumpers' bodies makes me sick. Vitamin A poisoning. Indigenous Arctic people never eat polar bear or seal liver, but when European explorers first ventured out, they ignored the superstition. Liver contains highly concentrated vitamin A, which breaks down the fat membranes in your body. When one has too much, their internal structure breaks down, turning them to jelly from the inside. There are stories of people literally going mad from headaches while their skin peels off around them, all while not knowing the cause of their illness. I never heard of vitamin A poisoning, and not that I'm looking for pictures, but I'm definitely intrigued, and I'm going to look up some of those European explorers now, at least from that timeline. Sounds terrible. Maybe not as bad as some of these, but there's a video, CCTV, around where a man jumped or fell off a building, not 100% sure it was a suicide, and fell onto what we call an Amsterdamtuig. It's a post about a meter tall they put around sidewalks. So he got impaled from ass to shoulder by this post without dying. You could see a big bulge from the post around his neck or shoulder. EMTs had to grind away the post at the base because they couldn't remove him and got him to the hospital that way. He either died in the ambulance or hospital, but I can't imagine that ride was fun. Here's a story where I was not personally present, but heard it from multiple sides. A guy walks with his coworker at work and suddenly collapses by cardiac arrest. Coworker, trained in CPR, does an excellent job at resuscitation, almost too excellent. Ambulance come and take over, and the heart massage via a Lucas. Don't know if the name is universal, but it's a machine that massages the heart. The guy that's dead wakes up, screams, hits the paramedics, is in total agony. Paramedic stops the machine, guy dies again. Medic starts the machine, guy wakes up, screams, hits everyone around him, is in absolute agony. Medic stopped the machine, cycle repeats. It takes 4 medics and 3 cops to hold the guy down while the cycle goes on. Eventually the guy dies completely in the ambulance. The cycles between starting and stopping CPR last for about 20 to 30 minutes. Leading doctors and higher-ups had a meeting about this guy and what could have caused this event. They all came to the conclusion that his heart imploded and was unable to be saved. However, because of the perfect CPR of the coworker, the blood flow of the guy went on without interruption to his brain. The guy was dead but was kept alive by the heart massage. The moment the massaging stopped, he would die again. His body didn't realize the critical failure of the heart, which caused him not to go into shock. They also concluded he would have been fully conscious while this all happened, which explains the screaming and hitting in pure agony. Basically, the guy died repeatedly and could feel everything while they kept him from dying. I had to sit with a patient on SI precautions one time who had shot himself in the head, severing both of his optic nerves with one bullet. He was completely blind from it. It was the most emotionally heavy day I ever worked, because he was intubated and the doctors and his parents didn't know if he was going to be able to see when he woke up. And then we all learned together that the answer was no. Everyone was devastated, and his parents didn't even know he was suicidal. They ended up telling me I didn't have to sit with him anymore because he was too disabled to kill himself. I watched an episode of First 48 where a couple of twats set some poor woman alight inside a static caravan trailer. Firefighters put out the fire, and this totally burnt woman came staggering out crying for help. She was in hospital for months, and it was touch and go for a long time whether she would survive. They put her in an induced coma to alleviate the pain. She made a remarkable recovery, though she did lose her right hand as a result. Be interesting to see what ambulance crews would respond to this with. There's an acronym for this, FUBARBUNDI, effed up beyond all recognition, but unfortunately not dead yet. Something I'm not sure many will mention on this thread though, mental health. Been through the ringer myself, and honestly, wouldn't want that for anyone. The Gimpie Plant in Australia. Not fatal, but when touched it has tiny stingers that cause extreme pain. It's been described as being electrocuted and set on fire at the same time. It's also known as the suicide plant, and for a good reason, and has been known to cause horses to plunge themselves into water to escape the pain. There's an account of a soldier accidentally using it as toilet paper and had to be held away from his gun. The thing is, it's actually a delicacy if the stingers are removed. I know it's the opposite of the prompt, but it's still related-ish. M&EMS came to a patient some 4 months ago after he had a stroke. 90 years old, barely alive, begged us to kill him with an OD in the ambulance. We couldn't do it, of course. Last week I arrived to him finally dying, and his family insisted we do CPR on him. He had a DNR, and they still yelled at us to do so. Fella died long time before we came. It was harsh.